Everything you've seen about the Iran ceasefire in the past 48 hours is either misleading or completely false. Because while headlines talk about a blockade, oil is still flowing, ships are still moving, and behind the scenes, a very different game is being played. So, what actually happened over the past couple of days? I know I've been away for a bit, and a lot of headlines have been circulating, but let me be clear. If something truly critical had happened, I would have already covered it. The problem is, social media, especially Facebook, is currently flooded with misinformation. A lot of what you're seeing simply isn't accurate. So let's break this down step by step. First, let's talk about Trump and the so-called naval blockade on Iran. As I mentioned before, any real blockade would hurt the United States more than Iran. Why? Because it would disrupt oil flow and drive prices up, something that directly impacts the global economy, and especially the US. So what we're likely seeing is not a real blockade, but a symbolic one, a show of force. Because so far, multiple oil tankers, more than 8, have moved in and out of Iranian ports without any interception. At the same time, ships have continued passing through the Strait of Hormuz after coordinating with Iran, without any interference. That tells us one thing: the flow of oil has not been disrupted, and that's intentional, because the US cannot afford a serious disruption in global oil supply. Now, add to that Iran's warning. Tehran made it clear, if any vessel is threatened in or around the Strait of Hormuz, then the entire maritime security of the Gulf region could be at risk. In simple terms, escalation would not be limited. Ports across the Gulf could become targets. And if that happens, oil prices could easily surge beyond $120 per barrel. So from a strategic standpoint, a full blockade simply doesn't make sense right now. Moving on to the second major narrative spreading online, China and Russia have abandoned Iran. This claim is based on statements attributed to Trump, suggesting that China is stepping back and refusing to support Iran militarily. But let's be realistic for a moment. Why would anyone take that statement at face value? Trump is known for making contradictory claims, sometimes within minutes. And more importantly, do you really expect China to publicly admit that it's sending weapons to Iran? Of course not. That's not how geopolitics works. Officially, China has always maintained a position of non-involvement, but behind the scenes, the situation can be very different. In fact, after those statements, China's foreign ministry reaffirmed its support for Iran's sovereignty and security, which clearly contradicts the idea that Beijing is abandoning Tehran. Now let's talk about Russia. The Kremlin stated it would not directly intervene in the war, but this is standard diplomatic language used by almost every country in similar situations. It doesn't necessarily reflect what's happening behind closed doors. In reality, intelligence cooperation and strategic alignment often continue regardless of public statements. And when you look at the bigger picture, both China and Russia are actually benefiting from the current situation. For China, despite being a major importer of oil through the Strait of Hormuz, there are already reports that Chinese-linked shipments continue to pass through with coordination. More importantly, there's a larger economic angle. If oil transactions begin shifting away from the US dollar toward currencies like the Chinese yuan, that could weaken the global dominance of the dollar itself, and that's a long-term strategic objective for Beijing. Iran has even proposed allowing passage through the strait under alternative payment systems, something that could reshape global trade dynamics. Now, for Russia, the benefits are even more direct. Rising oil and gas prices work in Moscow's favor, sanctions pressure becomes less effective, and energy exports turn into a powerful geopolitical tool, especially in relation to Europe and NATO. So the idea that both China and Russia would suddenly abandon Iran simply doesn't hold up under scrutiny, not when they have so much to gain. At the end of the day, a lot of what you're seeing online is noise, exaggerated claims, misleading narratives, and in some cases, completely fabricated stories. So don't take everything at face value. Focus on the facts. And if you come across any news you're unsure about, feel free to share it. I'll break it down for you. Stay focused on the truth.